All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this ECIPE online conversation. My name is Fredrik Eriksson, and I'm very pleased to welcome today Joerg Wuttke, President of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. The topic for today's conversation is China and its economic development in light of a new annual report that was published by Joerg and his colleagues at the Chamber very recently. There are few people in Europe and the world who come with the same depth of expertise and experience as Joerg in matters of China and its climate for foreign business. China has been his base for a long time, and he has talked and written extensively about his experience as a businessman in the country, being part of both the period when waves of economic reforms catapulted China into much higher prosperity, as well as having a ringside seat now, watching current developments in China, a country that has matured economically and that now seems to gradually been shifting its view on economic openness. Hello, Joerg. Good afternoon. I'm very glad to have you with me today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So first of all, congratulations to, again, producing a stellar report from the Chamber on policies in China and how European businesses are viewing this. This is a goldmine for anyone with an interest in understanding Chinese policies. And my hope and plan is that we can start our conversation there about your top-line findings and takeaways from your exercise now, and look at also how these takeaways sit in a broader analysis of China's economic direction. So let's start with your new position paper. What are the core takeaways that policy folks in Europe should pay attention to?
Thank you, Frederick. And let me just derail you from the start. Let me begin with a commercial. As the European Chamber is a 20-year-old organization, and we have now 9 offices across China. We are very unified lobby organization. We are unlike, say, the Swedish, German, or Belgian chamber, no trade promotion chamber. We are the advocacy group, and we have 1,700 members. And these members are divided in 35 working groups. So, for example, in the banking working group, we have about 100 bankers, then chemicals, maybe 40, you have cosmetics, you have environment law, and so forth. So the whole beast, as I'll call it, is put together by members, by active business people, and not by the chamber. Because it's very important when you lobby that actually you really have all the technical details ready, and you can do this. I mean, this book is not just for informing people. It triggers a massive lobbying campaign. Myself as president, I have to see possibly between 20 and 30 ministers and vice ministers, and then the chairs of the working group then sort of roll it out. And on average, we have about 40 meetings in Beijing in order to get this across. And of course, it's requested reading in the capitals around the world. It's very popular also in the White House, because we are the best technologically specific group that actually puts the pen to paper and gives ideas. We have 430 pages, so if you download it, it's more like you have to look up your area. I don't think you want to read it cover to cover. The only person that does that is Prime Minister Li Keqiang, I was told, in seriousness. We have 400 pages with details, and then we have, out of those, 930 recommendations. That's very important to us, that we not just sort of lament and wail at the Great Wall of China, but actually come up with points where we think the Chinese government can do better. And of course, we have also recommendations on top of it to the European officials, member states, as well as companies. But the essence of that report is then it's my duty to sort of come up with 35 pages of an executive summary that sort of puts the philosophy of how we see China in a couple of pages only. And this year's topic was self-reliance. It was something that I felt very strongly about witnessing the recent developments. We talk about 14.5, the dual circulation, the kind of Beijing leadership being concerned about the US containing China, the kind of eagerness to onshore a lot of these things. Now, self-reliance is, of course, something that you see also in other parts of the world, by British, by American or buy European, whatnot. We published a paper on this in January on decoupling. That's the worry that we have, as we are mostly global players. But in China, the self-reliance reaches deep, and of course, it has a Maoist DNA somewhere in the system, that China actually feels like they can do this because they can, meaning they're big enough, continental-sized economy, and the economy has been doing well over the last 18 months. That gives them the confidence of actually decoupling more and having a stronger sense of self-reliance. Self-reliance itself, we have a little study in the booklet that shows that self-reliance is coming at a cost. We even put down a number to it because China now has GDP per capita of $16,800, and we assume, or the World Bank, they've done this for us. The World Bank assumes that China in 2050 will be, if they're modeling through like this, at 46,000, and there is the very strong opening up agenda, which is above 50,000, and then we have the kind of self-reliance that is 30,000 something. So the gap between opening up and reform and self-reliance is a cool and staggering 25,000 US dollars per capita, meaning China has a choice. But you know, the choice has consequences for China, economic consequences, and has consequences globally for all of us. The growth machinery China might consider not to be the growth machine anymore.
Yeah, indeed. And I should also say congratulations to the 20th anniversary for the chamber. I didn't know that. And I can only sort of attest to what you were saying about the high quality of the work. It is really stellar work. So really congratulations on all that.
Well, thank you. The 20th anniversary, it coincides with the 20th anniversary of WTO session of China. And Chamber was actually inspired by Pascal Lamy when he came to China and says, I don't want to sit down with German, Portuguese, French, and whatnot. I want to sit down with insurance. I want to sit down with chemicals, for example. And that's where we realized it doesn't make sense to have national little groups doing that if we can pool all of that. And the chamber was founded in the spirit of Zhongji, in the sense opening up, China can do more, China can change, China can improve. And that sense is fading away, unfortunately.
Indeed. So let's get into some of the issues that you mentioned here. So you're talking about the 14th Five-year Plan. You mentioned dual circulation. So if we're going to make sense of all this, so what is it that China is trying to achieve in practice here? What does dual circulation means? I mean, you see this topic coming up in sort of headline speeches from sort of senior people in the government or senior officials. But when you start to unpack it, it's a bit difficult to understand what it actually means. Is it about sort of a wholesale decoupling from the global economy? Is it more focused on specific sectors, specific technologies? What is it about?
Well, the short answer to your question is we have no clue, because it is something that came up about 2 years ago. And dual circulation, of course, means there must be two rings to it. So my hunch on this one is it looks like a Victorian farthing bicycle, penny farthing, huge tire in the front and very small in the back. Of course, the small in the back is the globalization, is the connection to outside world. And the big one is, you know, how much can we do back here at home without interference from anybody who wants to hurt China. So dual circulation is a strategy in order to deal with a more difficult political environment, and it shows in some areas. I mean, we always had Made in China 2025, meaning China wants to not only absorb all these technologies that would then become a global player in all of them. Actually, the global player part, I think, is not that relevant anymore. But what worries us is, of course, that China is opening the door for some of us more than ever. At the same time, it is then basically closing the door, not only for us as exporters, but also for us in a way that we engage with China on research and development and so forth. So in a way, it is something where I can sense it appeals to China. Again, continental economy can maybe get away with this. Certainly Sweden cannot, Germany definitely not. But it is something that gives us opportunities and huge disadvantages. The opportunities come from the point that China says, I don't want a supply chain from outside the country. So why don't I just invite foreign companies to come here and do the damn thing here and not in Malaysia or in America or in Europe? And that opened up opportunities, such as for my own company, leading to a $10 billion project in Guangdong, or ExxonMobil has a $10 billion project. So Volkswagen can have a majority. All of a sudden, the government was in a hurry, and the hurry was in the manufacturing sector. That's also very important to see in connection with the 14th Five-year Plan. For the first time, China really does not emphasize the service sector. And that's where China was sparkling over the last years. In and finance, in the telephone directing drivers and whatnot. And Xi Jinping very strongly feels about that service sector leads to exuberance and a lot of rich people, but at the same time makes China exactly as vulnerable as it was before. They want planes, they want battery materials, they want chemicals, and it's manufacturing he's looking after. So for everyone in the crowd of yours that is in manufacturing, actually open up possibilities. If you're in service sector, you better read our report of where the challenges are going to be. And it's very telling that the president has been very tough and assertive recently in gaming, in educational, tutorial, all these areas where basically he believes that they have come out of whack. There is some IT robber barons. And so I guess the Gilded Age for services is over. And for manufacturing, I think these are the good days. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this. So the president emphasized manufacturing, but then we have to turn our factories off because we have no energy.
Yes, indeed. That small detail.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that seems, I have some troubles understanding the economic logic of it. So the economic logic here, if you think in the framework of dual circulation, would be that, well, China's economy is maturing. There's going to be a lot more expenditure on domestic services. And when we do these domestic services, we want to find ways to make sure that we can build up Chinese champions or build up a competitive Chinese base that make us much more reliant on domestic supply rather than global supply. So, and if that is the way that the Chinese economy more broadly is going, which is sort of typical rags to riches story, which is that the more affluent you get, the more you're going to spend on services. And now comes sort of a focus on manufacturing again. So what's the logic behind that?
The logic is control. The Communist Party is all about control. Xi Jinping is all about control. It is like making sure that China is a self-sustaining economy to a large extent. That doesn't exclude that China will engage internationally, but always with the sense of the imperial past, meaning like it's me with a small country, it's me ruling this relationship. The Belt and Road is a magnificent example of that. The spoken hub that China actually projects on the world, it's never going to be multilateral. China doesn't have a history of multilateralism. So in a way, we have to just see that China is willing to sacrifice economic growth in order to have this control. That's very hard for people to understand because everything was growth and growth again. But as you've seen in the recent years, in particular, how they dealt with Alibaba, now with Tencent, as well as tutorial and so forth, this is all shaving off GDP. I mean, this is really trillions of dollars that are getting lost there. And they want to do it for social reasons. Social mobility has been declining, like in the US, also here in China, and hence the tutorials had to go because they put in basically exams only for rich people who can train their rich kids to pass the test. Then, of course, there are all the other things that make it very clear to Xi Jinping that it might be cool if you have a mobile phone and you can have a noodle soup supplied to you within 30 minutes. That does not make you an economic superpower. So it's all about control. It's all about defense. Clearly, the security apparatus has taken over economic policy making here. And I'm sure the NDRC, MIT, and all these smart people in these ministries are a little bit pushed in the background, basically just being told how to fix the problem and make sure that China is not falling off the scale when it comes to developing their own battery and so forth and so forth. No, it's all about control. But again, for the Evergrande story, for example, it means deleveraging, de-risking a situation at the cost of GDP growth. And that's the new thing. Xi Jinping has made it very clear. Globalization has basically made a small group of people rich. 1% of Chinese population has 30% of wealth. That resembles the US, basically. But he wants to make sure that the pyramid that has been building up, few at the top, lots at the bottom, is basically turned into an olive that has a huge middle class and very few rich and very few poor people. He is a social re-engineering mode. Xi Jinping wants to put his imprint, and that's when you think like, why does China do it now? Well, he's not 50 anymore. The man is in a hurry, and China is in need of socially restructuring. So in many ways, I can understand the president doing just that. I question his toolbox, though.
And this focus on manufacturing, I would imagine that we are talking about sort of specific areas of strategic technology that they are more concerned about. Is that true? I mean, coming out with the pandemic, pharmaceuticals, medical technology, you have AI, robotics, connecting perhaps with China 2025 with broader programs for indigenous innovation. Or is there something new that comes into play here as well? New areas where they have identified this is where China is going to be sort of strong as an innovation base in the future, new sectors?
Well, a strong emphasis, of course, is on biotechnology. China's aging. China is certainly not going to get healthier. There are all these diseases that come along with a more affluent society. And China wants to be independent from areas where basically they feel like it can be controlled from outside. And that's the worry that we have. Of course, we understand that China wants to have its battery materials safeguarded, so they buy into all kinds of rare earth, raw material sources across the world. But at the same time, also China, with self-sufficiency or self-reliance in mind, is maintaining the production of stuff which I would consider sunset industries. It is highly energy intensive. It is actually something where we have the same production elsewhere. Say aluminum, say steel, say gasoline. China doesn't need that many refineries. China is not rich in oil, and they are trying to get away from cars. So why do you have so many refineries? Aluminum, why do you have production which is overcapacity? 80% of the cost is electricity based on 60 or 70% coal. If you can actually get it from your dear neighbor Russia, which has aluminum produced on a hydro power basis. So what we're saying, China, is why don't you let go on these areas in order to give space for new technologies, in particular also now space on the energy side. You know, aluminum, really, if you shut them all down, you gain a lot of energy. And now we are all getting basically into trouble across China by having to turn off our factories because they're short of coal, hence short of energy. So in a way, the self-reliance actually comes at a cost. That means I don't have the economic space anymore for new technologies. So there's a conflict they have to resolve. And of course, it comes as a massive problem for their aim of peaking carbon in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2060. If you want to be self-reliant, you keep your steel, you keep your aluminum, you keep your refineries, instead of buying it where it might be made cheaper and certainly greener.
So what is China's plan for dealing with its sunset industries? I mean, the fascinating story about China is basically that it modernized, industrialized in a way where you can basically expand everything at the same time. And then you get into sort of more mature development where suddenly you're not competitive anymore in some of the industries that you could easily expand. You need to facilitate sort of a structural change in the economy where you're going to move from certain type of output to other types of output. Is China still sort of occupied with trying to avoid that structural change? Are they looking sort of at a more extensive use of industrial policies, of regulatory policies in order to basically get more output to move from sunset sectors to more advanced sectors?
I am also vice chairman of the Chemical Association of China, which is a rare appointment, as normally that's a SASAC organization that is kept within Chinese companies. I'm heading the multinational committee, and the chairman is the Minister of Chemicals. He's my boss in that respect. And we had a great session with him last Monday, complaining about the energy shortages, because in my sector of chemicals, if you have an energy shortage, or even if you turn off the energy, suddenly you have accidents happening. So I said to him, how is that possible that basically China wants to have self-reliance and basically keep everything in the household, and then doesn't actually go and reform its economy? And he says, well, the problem is that they don't have any good statistical material for the local governments in order to see who is A class, who is B class, who is C class, where are the good guys. He said when there's stress in the system and all of a sudden we have to turn off the electricity, the Chinese officials react with one size fits all. You all guys do 30% less. If you are as clean and mean, say, as BMW in the north, or if you are basically as rotten as a little shack somewhere in Zhejiang, it's like you go off by 30%. So they have basically no toolbox to be subtle and sophisticated about who goes down first. Because there's local interest groups behind it. There are protectionism, of course. I want my chemical site, I want my fertilizer site, and so forth. So the country actually is run on a very crude basis. So if you say, you know, China should emphasize on the modern technologies, of course, that's what the minister wants. That's what his colleagues in the ministry want. But the problem is, do they have the money for it, the space and the technology and the people for it? And that's where it's getting very, very narrow, because smart people went into the service sector, because that's when you can make money with very little effort. And frankly, also until recently, very little government supervision. If you're manufacturing, you have the government sitting in front of your door watching out of what you're going to do. So in a way, it's a complete shift in this one. And of course, we want China to say goodbye to sunset industries. China, the ministers, my minister, is very keen to have that happen in the chemical sector. But he says, you know, it's very hard or next to impossible because this continental-sized country of China has so many different layers of interest groups that make that nearly impossible. So maybe the energy story now might be a catalyst in order to make that happen. But let me give the big picture on this one. China talks about reform, but they want to reformat the economy and society. It's not a reform in the sense give more to the market forces, give more to the economic players. It's all about more with control, reformatting the economy. And that's, of course, very alien to us back home in Europe. And why do they do this? Well, they are scared to lose control. Chinese officials hate volatility. They had a very tough time in 2015-16 when they opened the capital transfer markets, and within 18 months, $1 trillion left under whatever principle. You know, I want to invest in Waldorf Astoria, I want to invest in Volvo maybe, or I want to invest in 150 soccer clubs, always fast track to lose much money. So in a way, the second area where Xi Jinping has drew learning was the capital market, the stock exchange. You know, it was 2000 in 15 and went up to 5,000 in 16, and then crashed down again to 2000 and hurt a lot of small people that actually burned money left and right. So the man is in reformatting mode, not in reform mode. And that's why it's going to be very, very difficult to steer the ship into a different direction.
And on that note, sort of on control, risks, financial crises, I mean, at least Western media has been awash in stories over the past months about the real estate sector, about Evergrande. I noticed one paper which came out a while ago suggesting that 30% of GDP growth in China is dependent on the real estate sector. So to what extent are sort of the type of imbalances that we have talked sort of for a long time about in China, to what extent are they still remaining there in the economy?
Well, the guess that I would have is similar to yours. Real estate, construction, and all the related materials around it might be around 25% of GDP, so it's massive. So if that sector, is sneezing, the world will gonna have a cold, clearly. And so in a way, that has to be deflated because, again, exuberance led to the fact that Chinese are buying apartments not for the sake of living in it. Far from it. Actually, 90 million apartments are empty, so you can stuff the majority of Europeans into China with no problem whatsoever. And it's an investment. I mean, because the choice of investment is so limited here, and the success story was so good. Now China, or Xi Jinping in particular, has to educate his people to say enough is enough. 300% of GDP is debt. We cannot go on with this. We have to deleverage. He said that before COVID. It was sort of, he left the economy by itself, but he wants to reconnect again to the deleveraging story. And Evergrande goes down. There will be many other more real estate companies going down. And of course, it will be walking on eggshells in order to see how they actually can do this without scaring the people. So I guess that they are in deleveraging mode, and victim number one will, of course, be the foreign equity holder, the bondholders. They definitely will get the massive haircut. Then you have basically the companies that is being owed money. The most likely they also will have a massive haircut. But she definitely, as a good communist, will definitely look into the employment. 163,000 people are working for Evergrande. And of course, into these, 50 million people that I've bought into houses and actually are still waiting for them to get delivered to finished, as a matter of fact. So that requires incredible efforts. But the good news about this is that China basically owns everything. That's the party owns the companies, the party owns the land, the party owns the banks, and certainly the party owns the news and the media. So it can be contained. There will not be a Lehman Brothers effect where trust is gone among economic stakeholders and you have a complete meltdown. This will not happen here. But overall, it will mean it will be very expensive. It will be very, very difficult to manage this. I'm sure they can afford this and make it happen, but it comes at an economic cost. But if you benchmark this with the problem that we're facing now, energy shortage, self-inflicted energy shortage, frankly, the damage on the economy there will be much higher than the deflation of Evergrande.
All right. We're very soon going to go into issues around the rest of the world and their relation to China. But one final question sort of around China and connecting it also to your paper. So my question here is about China's thinking about innovation. Basically, what is their model of innovation? So you mentioned, for instance, that we've had a development in several services sectors where we've seen experimentation, you've seen new entrepreneurs, and possibly some of these entrepreneurs have become sort of too big for China, or they've have challenged at least some basic norms of economic success in China. So we're now moving sort of more to the manufacturing sector. And when we look there, so what are the thinking here? I mean, what I see is basically money coming from government. So more expenditures on R&D, helping companies, whether they are state-owned companies, semi-state or private companies, helping them with resources. You have lots of different provinces that are throwing their own cash into it, and they want to create industrial parks for this or that sector, and they want to stimulate this or that company. But that's an input factor, money going into innovation. But what about the other factors? I mean, you mentioned one thing which I find pretty striking in the paper, which is on human capital diversity and human diversity in China, and giving a view which I think is pretty sort of threatening to the underlying dynamism of Chinese innovation itself, which is that you don't find that much of collaboration with international companies, with human capital exchange, with R&D exchange on corporate levels. So what is the sort of model of innovation from China here? Is it just sort of an input thing, which is that we're going to throw cash on it, or is it something else as well?
Well, it comes, I would say, it's 50 shades of gray, basically. It has a lot of diversity in there. First of all, China's innovation so far was basically focused on business models, adjustments, development of products. And that's actually where then the service sector comes in, because there are less constraints. There are less raw materials constraints. There are less approval constraints. And that's why China all of a sudden was a digital wonderland, because people are very, very innovative over here. They have very good people in that sector actually coming up with stuff. Now, that was not really the case in the manufacturing world, where there are very few companies that actually have the ability of competing globally. And not only a price, but also quality. I mean, Huawei certainly was an extreme successful company. But again, on the edge of ICT, on the edge of software. And again, they need other industries in order to move forward. Now, the tricky thing is that research requires risk. The R possibly stands for risk. You start with 100 ideas, and normally 98 don't work out. Now, to accept that in a company is very hard for your shareholders also. So you try to limit this to some extent, but in a system which is not looking favorably at failure, that is a real damper on basic research. So China has developed a very strong development arm. They're wonderful in adjusting products or putting money there leads to real success, to the point where actually as Western managers, we should learn from this one. In I say R&D, but I mean development, China is sometimes twice as fast as we are. They are sometimes really responding to market trends in incredible fashion. And then, of course, we're falling off the cliff. But when it comes to the technology of the future, outside the service sector, it's very, very meager. And China, of course, knows that the government is throwing money at the problem like there's no tomorrow, and creates a new problem, because throwing money at a problem means that lots of people actually pretend there's a solution, gets a lot of government funds, and then sort of walk home. I mean, there's just 150 electric vehicle companies in China, 150. So the question really is, to what extent can they actually make research happen? And as you pointed out, diversity is required, the different composition of people, not a silo. And you have that to some extent in Shenzhen, where 60% of the population of Shenzhen comes from outside Guangdong. Still, us foreigners, we are totally insignificant for anything calling diversity. Again, keep in mind, there are less foreigners in Beijing and Shanghai put together than in Luxembourg. So the diversity is lacking. And of course, there is a real problem in getting diversity also connected to the outside world. We as a company want to have, of course, a strong relationship with our R&D folks back home or in the US or elsewhere. But now China came up with a new data transfer law, a cybersecurity law, which basically requires us to have a Chinese software and hardware, secure and controllable, which already made possibly us very uneasy about, so who is going to look into my R activities? And then, of course, the data transfer, whatever I do in China has to stay in China. And with research, that simply doesn't work this way. So they are presently, with a draft of some regulations and with the actual implementation of laws, killing innovation in a big way, in particular in manufacturing. So it's again very strange. Manufacturing is being emphasized, but the future of manufacturing is being undermined by lack of electricity or lack of security for people to react. So my guess is innovation in China will now see a very small r and a capital fat D. And that is possibly an indicator that China is punching below its innovation weight.
All right, so let's talk about China and the world. So a growing part of the world is formulating new policies that aim at countering Chinese economic practices or managing the long-term geopolitical consequences from China's rise and role in the Indo-Pacific region. So there is talk about decoupling, as you mentioned, and this talk, I think, is pretty strong in America, not so much in Europe, more in America. Here in Europe, we are developing sort of many different contingent and defensive policy tools that are targeting Chinese policies. So let's talk about where this development may take us in the future and how China views this development and what it means for its policy choices. So in the first place, is China worried about a development where it may see its own export market shrink because other governments are closing their markets to Chinese exporters?
Well, we covered part of this in the decoupling study. If you go on the website of the chamber, you can basically download it, no paywall, free of charge, no membership, whatnot. If you have a problem, maybe everybody can sort of pester Frederick and ask him to send him these reports. Decoupling is first and foremost on their mind, with a worry, because decoupling might mean sanctions, might mean higher tariffs, might mean that China is economically being challenged. At the same time, decoupling is good if it actually is referring to the mental stage of mind, meaning information, the firewall, the kind of lack of exchange with universities. We have a near complete collapse in cooperation of universities here, because we have an incredibly high firewall on quarantine and people coming in here. It's really dramatic of what's going on here. The exchange of ideas is limited to a couple of online sessions, and there even you can't really work together in a good manner. So the kind of decoupling in the head is actually more worrisome than the economic decoupling, and that of course leads also to plenty of misunderstandings. China is totally flabbergasted on how negative the world is looking at China, and we are totally flabbergasted about the fact how China is talking to the world, how they're treating the world, a kind of assertiveness that we haven't seen there. In particular, myself, I've been here 30 plus years. I came the first time to China in 1982. I've never seen any like this kind of nationalism, the kind of assertiveness. And it's very hard to tell them, guys, you know, you are basically driving this kind of us against them. They, of course, see the US behind each and everything, that the US is masterminding a containment strategy. There might be some truth to it, but it comes from somewhere. And I guess China's policy went from accommodating to assertiveness because they thought they could get away with that. Or maybe the president was in a hurry. He's not 50 years anymore. And so there we are. It's dramatic. The Pew research shows that China swung in most countries from 60 to 70% favorably, viewed by these populations 10, 15 years ago, to now 70 to 80% negative. And of course, the cake is taken by Korea and Japan, which are 85 and 82% negative. So in a way, China is narrowing its political space outside. Are they worried about the export markets? I don't think so, because it's a hugely sized domestic economy, and they might not be as relevant anymore for exporting things. They can basically sacrifice GDP growth against self-reliance and stick to this one. But I guess the part of the population that is definitely worried is the elite. These people made money. These people brought innovation to China. These people was connecting to the outside world. But these guys possibly have slightly more different political ideas than the leadership. And our leadership here basically turned anti-establishment. You can see that with Jack Ma and others. So in a way, it feels like China is turning its back on the world, which would be great pity, not only economically, but also culturally. But it seems to be very, very content with doing this. You cannot explain otherwise that wolf warriors, meaning the ambassadors, are basically offending their host countries left and right. Ambassadors here, European ambassadors, get bullied in virtually every meeting. This is not building bridges anymore. They talk about building bridges, but certainly the language is not up to it. And again, it seems to be like, all right, if the world is against us, maybe I can sell it better to my population. It's us against them. And then they assemble behind me and we're all in there together. Maybe it's a power stabilizing mechanism.
Is that also the explanation to sort of another conundrum, which is that, I mean, it's not just that China and its wolf warrior diplomats are making enemies, how to make enemies and alienate people seems to be sort of the core standard for some of them. But also that they seem to have made a couple of strategic errors that in broader strategy, which also must limit the space for China to act in future. I mean, for a long time, they had sort of a pretty robust understanding of the country and itself, which was, biding the time, using the fact that they don't need to accelerate any different issues of conflict because China is just going to get bigger and bigger, and these problems would almost solve themselves in the future. Now we have sort of Hong Kong. We're getting reactions from United States, sort of the AUKUS. We have Europeans getting more worried about what's going in there, and they all, even if they choose different strategies for dealing with the issues, they are basically in alignment when it comes to what the problem is, and that is going to have consequences for China's own options in the future.
Yeah. Again, I think that some people in the leadership are very content with the fact that the world is turning against them, meaning they can sell it to the average people. And, it could be 1.3 billion people, 100 million maybe don't believe this, but it's sort of like the world is after us. So, support the Communist Party. We're in for a fight. We're in for a struggle. The language indicates that these days over here, everything is a struggle. And that reminds me of the 60s and 50s, where everything was a struggle too, and struggle first against Americans and a struggle against the Soviets. And it was sort of, how to keep power in the family, that actually you can get away with this one. And again, they might easily sacrifice economic growth for this one. They can shave it off from the top, put it in the bottom, and so forth. What worries me there is the kind of loss of realism that I can sense in the leadership, the kind of well-educated and empathetic leadership that actually understood how the world is ticking. Now it becomes more of a binary view on the world. There is China and there is the United States. And of course, the United States is undermining all these little minor countries like France, Germany, and others. They're all the poodles of the United States. I mean, I hear it again and again, the Americans are making Germany do this. And I said, guys, we have our own foreign policy and we're not a pushover, but that's how they see it. Recently I was asked by one of these top advisors, does Germany have an independent foreign policy? And I says, of course not. We combine it in Brussels. No. This is not what I meant. I mean, how independent from the White House? Lithuania is a case, where they thought that the Lithuanians only did this, getting out of 17+1, having this Taiwan office, because they got a lot of money from the USA. They have no clue about what actually the Lithuanians went through in all these decades. And then, for example, this investment agreement, I tell them, guys, that was so obviously something US against Europe. The US didn't want it, wait for us, the outgoing as well as the incoming administration. It was a really hot Christmas last year. And we got it going, we got it signed. And then 12 weeks later, with oversized, steroid-rich sanctions against Europe, they made this deal impossible. And so I said, we really don't understand. The US comes up with sanctions at a certain level, no problem. Same level back from the US, from the Chinese to the US. The Europeans come up with equally sized sanctions, a little bit weaker, so it looks nice, but it's really not hurting China. And China comes back with the mother of all sanctions. And not only 5 parliamentarians that are supposed to approve the investment agreement, but it went on into commission bodies and so forth. So you ask yourself, what's wrong with them? How could they let this happen? What is happening with the foreign ministry? They should know it. The Chinese have an excellent ambassador in Brussels. Jiang Ming is really no wolf warrior. He's a pearl in the whole collection of ambassadors there. And I'm really worried as he's going to retire beginning of next year, who they're going to dispatch then. But it's really like the echo chamber is asking for a binary view on the world. And if they can't see it as, a European own thinking, it's because the Americans are behind it. And I guess this loss of realism will lead to many policy mistakes.
So in that context, where does CAI, the investing agreement, where does it sit now in Chinese discussions? I mean, as you say, remarkable how they mismanaged this entire episode just sort of a couple of months after they signed the agreement. And they should have known that this was going to have pretty serious consequences on the European side. What do they think about CAI? I mean, have they already written it off? Do they think there are constructive things to do with Europe?
It is really a big question mark. After all, CAI was put together by Merkel. And Merkel has a very high reputation over here. Merkel came up with a deadline, end of the year. She is having the presidency of the European Council. Hence, that's when you can get it going. And she got it going against huge, severe backlash from the US and others in Europe. And so instead of saying, okay, let's make sure that this survives, let's mastermind the sanctions and don't touch the parliament. No, full-fledged out 5 from 6 parties, major parties in the European Parliament. They picked 5 parliamentarians from each party just to make sure that everyone is miffed. It's just mind-blowing. And I guess they came to the conclusion at the very top is the Europeans wanted more than we in China. They benefit more, which I would solidly say it's not the case. I mean, it was a very shallow soup that we got offered there, but better a shallow soup than just water or nothing. So in a way, we in business wanted it, we supported it, and we are bitterly disappointed how China makes no effort in order to rectify this. It is dormant. I mean, they're vetting the language, but my picture for that is always the CAI is between an ICU and a morgue. We don't know which direction it's moving. It's a great pity. It has really soured the relationship. And again, it says a lot about China's view on Europe, that they say, guys, if you are from a minor region or country, such as Canada, Australia, or the European Union, you have to get punished far more severe than we would punish the equally important United States. So in a way, it just tells you how they look at the world, and we have to see how we deal with this. Certainly, we have to draw our conclusions from this one. We should look at this as a Sputnik moment. It's like if China doesn't listen to us anymore, we should continue talking to them and listening, but actually we have to get our homework going. We should grow ourselves because China's not waiting for us.
Yeah, no, indeed. Looking at, we mentioned several times United States in this discussion, and looking at sort of US actions and how these actions may have consequences for Europe and also for European businesses in China. So where do you think United States will be going? I mean, we had a an important speech given by Ambassador Tai earlier this week on China, where she, on the one hand, sort of reflected on the Trump administration's policies and the agreements that have been done with China, and concluded that, well, they hadn't really delivered much. And that, of course, also comes out from broader trade data when you look at US-China trade relations, that if they wanted to use these measures in order to reduce the bilateral trade deficit with China, they certainly failed on that ambition. But there are more, at least in my mind, confusions about, so where will America go next? What type of policy will they find, in this case, more on trade and economic policy with China?
Well, I guess that the US has this gene. Once it kicks in, it's very hard to make it undo. Is this competitive gene? Is like they challenge me, I'm going to hit back. And so I don't see any easing in the relationship, in particular also as there seems to be just one topic which combines, which the Democrats and the Republicans agree upon, that's China. So Biden would actually be ill-advised in order to just use that topic in order to drive an amicable China policy. So I guess that it's going to be a realistic policy of keeping the tension high, at the same time trying not to spill over into something hot or uncontrollable, but the tension is not going to go away. That's also the view from Beijing. Beijing doesn't trust the US at all. Again, they always believe that they are behind everything, besides the point that Europe has no own opinion. So that in itself already narrows the view of what can be achieved. So we will find a little bit of cyclical improvement, but the long direction is definitely more of tensions, and I hope it's not going to be a slippery slope downhill, but it's going to be tight for a long time to come, I'm afraid. Now, is that something that the US wants? I don't think so. I guess that actually the Americans really want to have China to integrate herself into the global order, which then is partly controlled by the US. But China has no such a thing. The systems are too different. The size is too similar. There is no accommodation on either side. I really don't see this happening anytime soon. By the way, on this phase one deal, I mean, I found it horrible. I always got reminded in December, why do you support the Kai? And I said the Kai is wonderful because it doesn't have a shopping list attached to it. And a totally unreasonable shopping list. When you look into the kind of energy China pledged to buy, actually they might now do a lot because they have to buy less at a much higher price. But it is interesting to see that actually the US says you have to help me to bridge my deficit, instead of saying maybe I should have my manufacturing sector up and running again so that I can match Chinese products again. I don't like this thing. I like the technical parts of the agreement, IPR, the kind of looking into consensus in certain areas of economic structure, but I really dislike this part. So if China has been not fulfilling that part, I couldn't care less, because why should China buy something from someone forced to buy it if they can get it cheaper and better elsewhere?
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Joerg. We are getting close towards the end, and I'm going to pick up a few questions that I've received in the chat during the conversation. I mean, there are far more questions than we will be able to cover, but one which I thought was very interesting and concerns demography and age in China. So the age pyramid, the fact that it's an increasingly aging society. What type of pressures is both the party and the economy confronted with now because of the changing demography?
It is huge pressure. It's really something that worries them big time. And they find very little space in order to rectify this. I mean, the one child policy has been going on way too long. And now basically you can have as many children as you want, but no one can afford it. Again, the whole idea about tutors, the whole idea about getting kids an affordable living space, real estate. I mean, who can afford all of that? Again, 90 million apartments empty. Just imagine how many people could actually from the countryside go in there. So aging is and the demographics is really terrible. It comes, of course, with health cost increases. It comes with loss of innovation and so forth. And they really, it's possibly one of the biggest thing on their mind behind the American issue, because it is like a tectonic shift. You can't control it. It's going to happen. It's going to be there. And when you look into how China is looking at India, India might be 1.6, 1.7 billion people in 60 years from now. China might be below 1 billion people, and very old people on top of it. How much innovation do you get out of this? But they're also equally worried about the unemployment in the youth. That is staggering. More than 20% on the kids actually graduate, don't find a job or a proper job. And that, of course, is a restive, aggressive part of society. And the leadership here really is worried what these guys are up to. Hence, they want to cut their time on gaming. They want to have a proper education. So again and again, I see very good areas that have been defined as a trouble spot. But I'm always missing the solutions. Will there be better schools? Will there be better paid teachers? Will there be better sports facilities? All of the above. Will the kids be able to travel easier abroad in order to get education there? All of that is not being indicated. So it's basically the toolbox in many ways, as justified as the targets are, contains only one thing, and that's a sledgehammer.
What about China's application to join the CPTPP, which at least came as a big surprise to many who have followed the discussions around both that agreement itself and China's views on it? Is it sort of a good faith application?
No, it's not. It's totally unrealistic. China wants to be in the game and wants to have a finger in the pie. And I guess they knew that Taiwan is going to apply. So I think they wanted to preempt it. So absolutely irrelevant.
Are they considering sort of other trade initiative to take with countries in the region? I mean, I suppose at some point they will feel a pressure coming from CPTPP, from AUKUS, perhaps other things that America and Western countries are going to do in the region. Do they feel sort of compelled to a value proposition to other countries in the region about engaging with China?
Certainly, they will reach out to ASEAN. They will certainly make sure that the Americans don't have an easy time to reconnect with Southeast Asia. But at the same time, the dragon looks like a dragon, it has fire like a dragon, and it sounds like a dragon. So all these countries, be it Vietnam, be it Malaysia, all had their experience. And so nobody wants to offend China. Nobody wants to choose between China and the United States. But the South China Seas, just if you look at the map, that settles the questions. They're all scared how to deal with this big country that seems to be inattentive and not listening mode anymore. So I guess that for us as Europeans, there could be a great opportunity to engage more. I guess we should have a little bit more of a robust, self-confident foreign policy supported by a trade policy. We have a lot to offer, and we are big. We are much bigger than the US in foreign direct investment. The stock of direct investment from Europe is staggering 11.6 trillion US dollars. The US has 6.8. China has a measly 1.9 trillion US dollars invested abroad, and Japan surprisingly only at 1.5. If you look into an economic heavyweight globally, it's European Union. I'm not sure anybody knows it back home.
Yeah, no, I think there is a huge educational effort to be made there, indeed. And I think, Joerg, that's actually going to be the final words from our session here today. It's been great talking to you as always. Thank you so much for taking the time. And again, I mean, congratulations to all the fantastic work you're doing at the Chamber.
Very nice. Thank you very much for the invitation. See you, I hope, in Brussels. I don't know when, maybe 2023. I don't think they'll open up next year. All right, take care. Bye, Frederick.
Thank you so much. And also thank you to all of you that have participated in our event. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you and have a good day.
Bye-bye.